You are entering the Nillyverse with your hosts Gustavo Candia and Rodney Perry. This episode has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. No.
Well, good morning.
Good morning, Rodney.
Yeah, so today, in this last section of the book, we've, I think, rather generous in our writing, in that we just didn't end the book with criticizing popularizers of science, but we've come up with 3-4 very important themes within the world of physics, and talked about how, if one would look at what we've talked about in our book on nihilology, would actually lead to a greater understanding of those theories. And this one that we're talking about today, the simulation hypothesis, it's so obvious, so obvious that the popularizers of science have been unable to contend with this notion. And I think from looking at our book, there's a lot to be said. We've said a lot about how we can understand this simulation hypothesis in our book. So I thought we'd just start with that. I'll just talk about how that can be so. We'll enter into the world of the matrix and we'll see what we can find.
Sounds good.
So I didn't realize it was getting so old now, but Nick Bostrom first brought out the notion of the simulation hypothesis way back in 2003.
Oh, okay.
It's been around for a while. And in the book, I call it an IED that someone left in the road, and a huge crater was created there, and popularizers of science have been trying to contend with it ever since. And in fact, really haven't gone far beyond the original Bostrom notion. Bostrom puts forth these 3 propositions. I don't find them totally engaging and in terms of mathematical quality that he always points to. But the third one is the IED in the road, and he says this: we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. I mean, that's the big phrase that he brought up. That's a simulation hypothesis. He differentiates between a simulation argument and a simulation hypothesis, but I don't think we need to contend with that right now. This notion has been very popular among people. It's a kind of fascination among popularizers of science to talk about it. But in fact, they haven't done a very good job. Nihilology can, in fact, help us with interpreting what he means. So one of the things that I think is really important is that you have to see that Bostrom is not a fringe person. Nick Bostrom, he's a professor at Oxford. He's written New York bestseller books. He wrote a famous one called Superintelligence: Paths, Dangers, and Strategies. So he talks a lot about the dangers of AI and the ethics that are needed and so forth to live a life with human beings. And he's a very well-respected physicist. And Bill Gates and Elon Musk have both been fascinated with him and taken up some of his notions. I watched quite a bit of Elon Musk talking in recent days, and I hadn't realized how what an advocate he is of the possibility of the world being a simulation. So what does he exactly say? This is just simply put, Bostrom says that at some time in the future, we will develop a super intelligent transhuman, and they will have great intellect and great technical power, great financial worth, and so forth. And he says that these future humans will take an interest in simulating their past, and they will come up with utterly complex virtual realities that he calls ancestor simulations. That he says that these future people will be interested in setting up simulations of their past, of their ancestors. And the point, of course, the simple point of all that is, that's us. We are living in one of those ancestor simulations. Let's just take a little bit of a critical distance from this before we kind of enter into the matrix of it. So there's what I saw is we point this out in the book in a much more elaborate way, but there's at least 2 difficulties with this simulation hypothesis. One is that it's an a priori belief. It's an a priori belief on Bostrom's part that our future evolved beings are going to be interested in doing ancestor simulations at all. Here's one thing that Bostrom says. He says, there are certainly many humans today who would like to run ancestor simulations if they could afford to do so. Now, this is not based on any, I've not heard anybody declaring in the streets that they'd want to run an ancestor simulation. And I haven't heard any scientific evidence that says that people have a natural desire to run ancestor simulations. It seems that's one of Bostrom's desires, to run an ancestor simulation. This is clearly just a belief on his part that in the future they will do it. He'll often talk about the odds. If, you know, if there's a billion people, at least one of them would want to run an ancestor simulation. I never believe that kind of. It doesn't hold much with me. A second problem that we have with Bostrom is that he talks in an article that I read. He says a colleague of his claimed that he could see pixels, that his vision, especially around dawn or dusk when the light was low, that he could see that his vision was pixelated. And he brought that up to Bostrom because computer created spaces. If you look really very closely, fine-grained, you see they're pixelated. You can see the pixels as you get closer. And he did that as a way of bolstering Bostrom's notion that, oh yeah, we are in a simulation. I can see.
People can see the pixels.
I can see pixels. And, you know, the guy didn't think he had a vision problem. He actually thought he had quite a good vision, quite a good sense of vision. But what was interesting is that Bostrom just ignored, not ignored because I saw it in an article, but he kind of like poo-pooed the notion that this fellow could see pixels, and therefore kind of bolstered the notion that we were living in a computer simulation. Because he's basically saying these future people of superintelligence would simply reprogram anybody that found a glitch. Basically, what Bostrom is saying is that I'm positing that we live in a simulation, but that posit cannot be denied, nor can it be affirmed.
Sounds very unscientific.
Exactly. He's a scientific fellow, and he's saying that what I've affirmed, what I've posited in my theory, you can't you can't deny it, nor can you affirm it. And so I just laughed aloud when I heard that, because it's a scientist basically saying that this isn't a scientific theory. Yeah. So anyway, difficult. And one of the things that Bostrom and others who are all interested in the simulation hypothesis, and they're really ignoring the pattern of knowledge that we have brought out in nihilology, the pattern of religion, science, and philosophy. Because if they had followed the pattern of religion, science, and philosophy, they'd have a lot more to say about this notion of simulation hypothesis. I mentioned that popularizers of science have been fascinated with this simulation hypothesis. Stephen Hawking wrote about it. Neil deGrasse Tyson has written about it. Like Tyson, I've just mentioned this Tyson, this is something we talked about some weeks ago. Tyson is so fascinated by this that he put together one of the Isaac Asimov memorial debates focused on the simulation hypothesis. And he brought together some very important popularizers, David Chalmers, Lisa Randall, Max Tegmark, and so forth, to talk about the simulation hypothesis. And I thought one thing that was really kind of interesting there is David Chalmers said, we have a 20% chance that we are living in a simulation. Where did he come up with? Did he just pick that out of there? 20% chance. Anyway, what this fascination by the popularizers with the simulation hypothesis has shown us is that they really don't have the tools within their own toolbox to really solve the question of the simulation hypothesis. Now, if the popularizers were to take a look at the pattern of understanding, they would see very quickly, and this is not hidden, this is not hidden, but in the world of philosophy and religion, at least 2,500 years ago, at least 2,500 years ago, religions, especially of the East, though not necessarily all of the East, you have to do a little bit harder looking among the Kabbalists or the mystics of Christianity or the Sufis of Islam. But in the East, it's one of the major tenets of Buddhism and Hinduism, various forms of Buddhism and Hinduism, that the world has a virtual quality. It is a virtual reality. Now, we've talked about this a lot in the book, but if you look at the Buddhists, the later Buddhism, they call Mahayana or Zen Buddhists, that is, they came to be in Japan, that all created things are shunya, they are empty, that all created things only find their reality as they are permeated by nothing. We've talked about the Taoists. The Taoists say that the world, in fact, doesn't work at all without the presence of nothing. That we had this a group called Sankhya from within Hinduism, that talk about the fact that neither the manifest world nor the individual self are real. The only reality is found when the consciousness or the nothing is present. And so the easiest way, if you haven't really, for most of our readers who haven't been, looked into Eastern philosophies for a huge part of their life, and the easiest understanding of a simulated quality of the world, it comes from Vedanta. Vedanta, that means the end or the purpose of the Vedas. They claim to be the very purpose for which the Vedas came to be. It would be like saying we understand the very purpose of the Bible. And the Vedantas speak about the simulation in a way that Bostrom would totally hear. It's an echo of the Bostrom's understanding. So just quickly, and then I'll be done with this little section here. But the Vedantans hold that this manifest world, this world in which we live, this three-dimensional space in which we live, is a superimposition on the infinite nothing. That's superimposition. It's avivarta. It is an imposed semi-reality, a virtual reality. This reality they call Brahma. Brahma is what we would call a god, but it's not a personal god at all, but it is in fact a kind of, the name means like infinity, it's the infinite. And so we're talking about what we have termed to be nothing. This world that we live in is called the Vyavahara. It's the kind of like, it's just the customary, agreed upon daily world. And that agreed upon customary daily world is not absolutely unreal. Like Shankara says, this is the famous Vedanta says, it's not like, the world is not like the horns of a hare, meaning it's not like a rabbit with horns, which is utterly unreal. It's dreamlike in nature. That the world we live in is dreamlike in nature. It's neither totally unreal, nor is it real.
It's like a correspondence between it and reality, but not reality itself.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a correspondence, and I mean, like in a Freudian sense, you could say that there's symbols in a dream that correspond to your life and so forth. You could say there's a symbolic relationship between its world and your life. There's a lot to be said there, but let's just leave it at that. That the Vedantans say that the world is what we call a virtual reality. And we've talked about a lot, for instance, how the whole gaming world has taken on the world of the language of Vedanta. When, for instance, your character in a game, what's called an avatar, which is a Sanskrit word, implying that you come from the world of reality down into the world of dream and so forth. Here's the genius of Vedanta. The genius of Vedanta is this. Vedanta says that as we are immersed in the three-dimensional world throughout our lives, we come to believe that it is real. We come to believe that it is real. We come to be convinced that it is genuine. That's exactly what, if you listen to discussions, particularly of Elon Musk, and he has a different way of going about the simulation hypothesis than Bostrom. But what Elon Musk will say is that the simulations will become so good that eventually we'll think that they're real. Vedanta says that the world itself, the manifest world itself, is so good that we think of it as real. But in fact, it's not. It's a virtual reality, just like a simulation game.
Pretty much the same thing.
Yes.
The reasons are different, but it's pretty much saying the same thing.
Right, exactly. There's a lot to talk about there, but I think that's the key. Mm-hmm. That's the key to think about it, is that the world as expressed in Vedanta is essentially the same as the world expressed in the simulation hypothesis, a three-dimensional space that we come to believe is real. An interesting, very interesting notion that Elon Musk was talking about, when you come out of a virtual space, then, for instance, if you immerse yourself in a virtual space for quite a bit of time, when you come out of the virtual, when you take off the goggles and the gloves and the suit, your daily life seems unreal. So that transition from the virtual to the daily and the daily to the virtual actually is quite a teaching moment about how we actually experience the daily life we have. When you come out of a virtual space into a daily life space, then the daily life space seems virtual. And then we, again, become immersed and it becomes real again. Now, Elon Musk, the difference between Elon Musk and the Vedantists, of course, is that Elon Musk thinks that's an illusion. He thinks that's a kind of a psychological transition, that we sort of think the daily world is unreal for a while until we sort of shed ourselves the experience that we're in the virtual. Whereas the Vedantists would say that moving back and forth between virtual spaces is a teaching moment that allows you to see that the world itself is actually a little different sense, but my understanding, and this is what one of the things I think that we're really helping with, if Elon Musk knew about Vedanta, he would interpret that going back between virtual spaces in a much different way. Mm-hmm. I think that's sort of one of the things we're sort of bringing up. So let me just do one more thing. Vedanta believes that the world is illusory in nature. It has an illusion. That's a famous word, Maya, the illusion of the world. What the Vedantas say is that the illusory world, the world that's manifest before us in a daily way, only seems to be separated from nothing. It's an illusion that seems to be, that we think it's different than nothing. And that this thought that the world is different than nothing is called ignorance, avidya, not knowing. So we take the empirical world as real. That is, in Vedanta, is called ignorance. One of the things that would be interesting, we've talked about this is akin to what we're talking about with the pops having a bit of humility. According to Vedantas, the popularizers are ignorant of the nature of the world. It might behoove the popularizers of science to kind of like take that in a bit. Not to say that ignorant in terms of you don't know about mathematical principles, or that food is nutritious or something, but that you may not in fact understand the nature of the world completely.
Too much stock into this simulation, if it is a simulation, right? Like to put too much emphasis of yourself, of your mental space, right? To devote to the illusion, to the simulation. Asking other questions might better serve you, even to understand the simulation, which is what you're targeting.
Understand the simulation, and that's what I find interesting, is that popularizers are fascinated with finding out the answer to this simulation. It's a real. I don't want to go into the history of all that, but yeah, and I think that nihilology would help them understand this. And one of the notions that we look at in the book, we have a little motto in the book that nothing makes the world real. And that it would be, I think, a bit of a model that the popularizers of science might take up. If you take a look at the world, incorporating nothing into your vision of the world suddenly becomes real. Mm-hmm. And that overcomes, explains, let's say, the experience of simulation in the world, or the illusion of the world. So nothing makes the world real. There you go. I mean, interesting. I think it's fascinating. The parallels are so obvious and so clear. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. To follow up on that, the universe can be a computer simulation, just like it can be one of a near infinite number of universes in a big old multiverse. We've talked about this before, right? Yeah. But until you can articulate how the voyage, right, is made between, to experience it ourselves repeatedly, and without using any proxies, right? Like, electrons, sending electrons to some other universe and then reporting back to us, right? If we can't get that, right, then the simulation hypothesis will remain metaphysics at best. There's no way, as you mentioned before, right, that this can be science if you cannot verify it for yourself. That just seems obvious, but
it is obvious, isn't it?
It is, but these people persist. But there might be another interpretation to that, which we'll get to a little bit later. But I guess maybe before I sort of speak about like sort of what I wanted to share today, maybe what we can do is we can hop on pop, and the pop for today is not really a pop. Well, it is pop, right? But it's not a pop. It's pop culture. It's
definitely pop.
The movie The Matrix. In fact, the scene from the second film. It's the scene where Neo encounters the architect,
right? Which
is a scene that's loaded with ideas relevant to our discussion. Without further ado, let's open the door to the realm of the architect and see what's behind.
Who is this architect anyway?
Yeah, so let's see here.
Hello, Neil.
Who are you?
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you. You have many questions, and though the process has altered your consciousness, you remain irrevocably human. Ergo, some of my answers you will understand, and some of them you will not. Concordantly, while your first question may be the most pertinent, you may or may not realize it is also the most irrelevant.
Why am I here?
Your life is the sum of a remainder of an unbalanced equation inherent to the programming of the Matrix. You are the eventuality of an anomaly which, despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision. While it remains a burden assiduously avoided, it is not unexpected, and thus not beyond a measure of control, which has led you inexorably here.
You haven't answered my question.
Quite right. Interesting. That was quicker than the others.
Others? How many? Others? What? Answer me.
The Matrix is older than you know. I prefer counting from the emergence of one integral anomaly to the emergence of the next, in which case this is the sixth version.
5 ones before me. There are only 2 possible explanations. There were 5 ones before me. Either no one told me,
Or no one knows.
Precisely. As you are undoubtedly gathering, the anomaly is systemic, creating fluctuations in even the most simplistic equations.
Control me! I'm gonna smash you to bits! You can't make me do anything, like prick!
Choice. The problem is choice.
The first Matrix I designed was quite naturally perfect. It was a work of art, flawless, sublime, a triumph equaled only by its monumental failure. The inevitability of its doom is apparent to me now as a consequence of the imperfection inherent in every human being. Thus I redesigned it, based on your history, to more accurately reflect the varying grotesqueries of your nature. However, I was again frustrated by failure. I have since come to understand that the answer eluded me because it required a lesser mind, or perhaps a mind less bound by the parameters of perfection. Thus the answer was stumbled upon by another, an intuitive program, initially created to investigate certain aspects of the human psyche. If I am the father of the Matrix, she would undoubtedly be its mother.
The Oracle.
Please. As I was saying, she stumbled upon a solution whereby nearly 99% of all test subjects accepted the program as long as they were given a choice, even if they were only aware of the choice at a near unconscious level. While this answer functioned, it was obviously fundamentally flawed, thus creating the otherwise contradictory systemic anomaly that, if left unchecked, might threaten the system itself. Ergo, those that refuse the program, while a minority, if unchecked, would constitute an escalating probability of disaster.
This is about Zion.
You are here because Zion is about to be destroyed. Its every living inhabitant terminated, its entire existence eradicated.
Bullshit.
Bullshit!
Denial is the most predictable of all human responses. But rest assured, this will be the 6th time we have destroyed it, and we have become exceedingly efficient at it.
Pretty powerful stuff, right? Like
An amazing scene. I had forgotten that.
all the action that takes place, right? And he gets to the end. You can sort of see that, like, you know, the architect represents the, I guess, the god of the Matrix, right? He's the
right.
programmer for the simulation hypothesis. The Matrix is essentially the world that we believe to inhabit. Okay, and
Right.
the architect appears as a super rational man, the Ubermensch. And his universe is one of harmony and mathematical precision. This is the holy grail of all popularizers of science. No longer do we have to sort of hold on to these stories and myths, right? We can just believe in the mathematics, right? And that's essentially the kind of world that this architect wants the subjects, right? His subjects in the Matrix, right? To accept the Matrix. You have a choice, but choose the Matrix because it's so much better for you.
That's right.
I really like the screens in the background. The screens, for me, sort of seem like that they're all the possible choices that Neo can make in reacting to the architect's words.
That's right.
For me, they kind of constitute or symbolize, right, the wave function with each probability of its being taken. So as Neo narrows in on a reaction, finally chooses what to say, the wave function crashes or spikes, and then the path, his path, right, becomes singular and defined, at least in the simulated world. And the intuitive program being the counter, like the yin to the yang, or vice versa, right? Like the counter to the architect is the oracle, right? Intuitive, right? Where had the idea, right, of giving people choice. The architect mentions like 99% of the test subjects accept the matrix over reality. Remember, like, over the true reality. And essentially, I guess, bringing in like this idea of like kind of manufacturing consent, right? Look, you have free choice, but come on, like which one would you choose? You know, this wonderful life where you have all the things that you want, or this dreary life where you're eating gruel, right? There is no choice, really, right? You only have two choices, and it seems like this one's so much better, right? But it is in choosing reality over matrix that has the potential to unleash the anomaly, right, and disrupt the otherwise orderly program.
That's right.
So, in the second film, right, Neo is told that the savior prophecy, right, he's supposed to be the one savior of Zion. He's told that the prophecy is a lie, and Zion, and it's confirmed by the architect. So it was told to him, I believe, by the oracle, and that in the architect sort of confirms that Zion falls, right? It's fallen 5 times and it will fall a 6th time.
Again,
He's just part of a karmic cycle in a way. Zion is Israel, and Zion is built by free minds. 5 previous anomalies choose to go back. So in the 5 previous anomalies, so Neo is the 6th. The choice by the anomaly is to go towards, remember, at the end, he has a choice to go left or right, to go to one side or the other. Behind one door is he can go back to Zion and save Zion, or behind the other door, he can save the woman that he loves. Interestingly, Neo chooses to go back to the woman he loves at the expense of all of humanity, right? Shunning the prophecy, essentially, right? Knowing that it's a lie, he shuns the prophecy. But interestingly, in the third film, Neo somehow accepts the role of savior and does end up saving Zion, when the possibilities for doing so were far, far more remote. It was far more irrational to go and try to save humanity at the point that he chose to than this point right now, where it seemed more likely that he could save all of humanity, even if it would just mean that you just have to cycle it through again, and you'd be stuck in that loop of karmic sort of birth and rebirth.
So much to do there. It's the constant turning back on itself. You never know who or what is inside or outside.
The architect catches Neo by surprise too, right? I guess this is the pursuit of those popularizers that are promoting something like that, or believing in something like the simulation hypothesis. They long for conversation with an architect.
That's right. In terms of critique of the popularizers, is that, for instance, we talk about Lawrence Krauss all the time, but it's not just Lawrence Krauss. Michio Kaku and a variety of others clearly say that within our world, in the world of physics that they normally study, there is no prime mover, there is no creator, there is no need. According to Krauss, the prime mover is irrelevant. We're not going to worry about denying the existence of a prime mover, but it's just irrelevant because we can explain the creation of the universe without a creator, any sort of being, any sort of existence outside of the manifest. But nonetheless, when popularizers of science begin to consider, and of course they are considering a metaphysical reality, a reality that they have always tried to shun, and in fact said that they don't do it. But indeed, they are considering metaphysical reality. They are taking on the role that has been taken on in the past by religious leaders and so forth. And I thought it was very convenient the way they make Neo look like a priest. So on the one hand, what we call our daily world, our natural world, The popularizers vehemently argue that there's no need for a creator or a prime mover. The simulation hypothesis, it's taken for granted that there is a prime mover. There is an architect, there is a programmer, there is a postulated future human that is great. And scientist Gates, I can't remember his first name, very clearly said that the simulators, evolved beings in the future, those simulators are gods. They say that they play exactly the same role. So in the realm of simulations, they take on all the classic religious questions. In the realm of the natural world, they absolutely deny that any of those questions are valid. And I find that is, to me, an embarrassing contradiction.
Oh, yes. But the reason that they do it is obvious. The idea of an architect or an engineer or a kid that's just playing around on his computer, sort of like, moving around as like his little puppets, it's palatable, right, or digestible. I can understand that. I see that in our world, and I have a good sense of it, right? And so that's what makes it sort of like okay, because I don't have to revere the little pimple-faced kid in the higher order universe, right? Programming, right? He's just one of many other kids that he might not even be a good programmer, right? Like this might be a flawed program that he's built.
That's right. That's right.
He might not be a good student in that higher order universe, whatever. Right. So I don't have to revere him, right? But he explains the questions the ancients had and questions that we still sort of ask ourselves today about like why we're here and everything. Well, it's easy, right? There's some pimple-faced kid up there in the sky that sort of has programmed all of this, and that's all you need to know. Let's study the simulation and see what the simulation yields. Yeah. But I don't know. But I guess all fun aside, right? What I wanted to do today is kind of separate the wheat from the chaff with respect to the simulation hypothesis, and try to nail down how the idea maps to reality recognized by science.
Oh, okay.
So, like with this, I'm going to propose to tweak how the phenomenological be understood under simulation hypothesis. So I'm going to sort of say, let's assume that the universe as we know it is governed, right, by a higher order algorithm. Let's assume that. The simulation hypothesis has become popular explanation for what the universe is at its core, because the world as we know it is increasingly run by code, automation, and digital displays. It's ubiquitous in our world. We are surrounded by technology, run by ones and zeros, and have ample evidence for how technology changes human behavior, not to speak of what can be done with like genetic engineering. It's not altogether shocking that we begin to question whether our universe is some higher order digital rendering of a higher order computer program that has been executed and played for us to see. So the simulation hypothesis at its core postulates a digital universe, both foundation and display. So the foundation is the code, right? The displays are the pixels. And this matches nicely with quantum mechanical interpretation that at the Planck scale, time and space are discrete units. The physical universe, when we get to the nitty-gritty, is discrete. If quantum mechanics pretty convincingly governs the subatomic world, all this assures some of these secularists that it is safe to believe, scary word, in such a metaphysical extension to normal science, right? So you can hope that it's scientific, the simulation hypothesis, but I believe that the popularizers that subscribe to the simulation hypothesis don't really believe that it is a scientific explanation, right? It's a metaphysical extension to normal science, and that's fine. But here's the question, right? Is the world fundamentally digital in all aspects? Well, if you look at like image capture from the early 90s and compared a camcorder, a digital camcorder, right, with 16 millimeter film, you'd grant that the camcorder's recording looks more like real life than a film.
That's right.
Right. So here's an example quickly that I can share with you guys so that you can compare and see sort of the difference between the two. So the first here is digital.
Okay.
So take a look at the quality of the image.
Yeah, it's really good.
We're still in digital.
Yeah.
Remember, this is like, these are old. These are cheap old cameras.
Okay.
And here's 16 millimeter film.
Ah.
So notice that it's warmer, right? You see the specks popping up.
Yes. Huh. Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'd never really seen it compared like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We know though that appearances can be deceiving. The camcorder shot, the film shot, seems like that. Oh yeah, like the world appears more digital. It's more the digital capture is more faithful to what we experience than the film capture. Okay.
Yes.
If the world of appearances or common experience is classical, we can intuit that at some level reality could appear more grainy and film-like. Ironically, to remain consistent with quantum mechanics. Remember, we said that quantum mechanics is digital. At the Planck scale, it seems like that time and space have been made discrete, right, and as such been made digital. But in some way, right, what we can sort of say is that if we understand, or if we grant that appearances can be deceiving, right, and the world of appearances or common experience is classical, the analog here is that common experience is classical, then there could be a level of reality that could be more grainy or film-like. That would be more quantum mechanical, right? Quantum mechanical kind of subatomic world. So we're well aware of concepts like position and momentum being fuzzy, right? When spoken about about the same object at the same time. But the truth is everything becomes nebulous when we begin to observe too finely. There are limitations to how fine our vision can be, and so we can surmise that a reality that is infinite can never be seen clearly. And in science, there's a measurement called nebulosity that is proportional to the space-penetrating power of your instrument. So the higher the power, the more nebulous things become. You think, how's that work? Well, in space, if you look out at space, so if just the naked eye looks at space, right, we see little dots, stars, but we know that the dots are the brightest stars are the ones that are made visible to the naked eye. Everything else is black, correct?
Right. Yeah.
But if we take a like a telescope to the sky, we start to see far more dots, and the more resolving power, we start to see like sort of clouds, right? Because we can see further and further.
Right. We see
things become less definite, right? We start to see more clouds from the space penetrating power of the instrument.
That's right.
Nebulosity is also inversely proportional to magnification, but only until a certain point. Because if the sum of the noise in the imperfections of the reflecting surface or vibrations, right, in the air and turbulence in the atmosphere is magnified, then there could be like more noise than signal. That can also cause nebulosity. So there's nebulosity in that you can observe more, and it becomes nebulous because reality itself is from our perspective, there's more of it, and so it's harder to distinguish between things. But also in that we're measuring, there are imperfections in our measuring devices that get magnified along with our resolving power. Right? Cancel out whatever it is that we're resolving, right, or cancel out the signal and boost up the noise, causing some nebulosity there too. Point is, the sharper images are produced as the aperture size. Remember, the aperture is how large the hole is, right? The hole that an image is captured by, the aperture of the camera. So an image is sharper as we reduce the aperture size, right? But this comes at the expense of light entering the chamber.
Right, you get less light.
So what we can do is increase the exposure time. So yes, the aperture is small as opposed to large, right?
Yeah.
Small, right? But what we can do is leave it open for longer and then close it.
That's right.
Okay. But what does that do? By increasing the exposure time to compensate for the loss of intensity, now any motion is being photographed as well. The camera itself, the image will be blurred as a result of the aperture being exposed, the film being exposed for a longer period of time. More light is coming in. And so what does this mean, right? Like The aperture size, essentially, right, is the uncertainty in energy. The smaller the aperture, the smaller the uncertainty. The exposure time, in a sense, the instant that is more instant, right? So the uncertainty in time increases the longer the image is exposed for. Right. So the instant, right? An instant, right? If an instant is like a snapshot, so one snap, right? The longer you hold the aperture open, the greater the uncertainty in time. In a sense, the longer your instant is, the longer your instant is. The question is, what are we exposing the light? So now let's take a look at how a digital sensor captures light and how a film sensor captures light. And for that, I just drew something up here. Okay, so the top image is a digital array. Okay, like this is like a CCD sensor or a CMOS sensor, and it's like a grid. Okay, the grid is permanent, and here you see that there's one pixel. So light is being shone on one pixel, and the intensity there on the right is centered about that pixel. Well, most of the light is on that pixel. There's a little bit of light spread out across, but the majority of the light is right there on that pixel. In film capture, right? Film is captured not on pixels or not on a digital array, but film is captured on, I guess, a jelly of silver halide crystals. And the crystals are like these plus and minus little blobs here. And you see that one film frame is different than the other film frame. So in this shot, this same image, whatever it was that you captured here at the top with a digital capture, you're capturing that same image, say a picture of a tree. The picture of a tree from the same angle with the same lighting, everything the same with a digital camera, and then you snap in the exact same position with a film camera. Okay, you're going to get not the same image, right, because of the nature of digital versus film, but you have your baseline. Now, take a successive shot. If you take two images, the digital capture, you take two images, the two images should be the exact same. If nothing changes, if the lighting is the same, if the position is the same, then the two digital images taken on two different instants of time should be the exact same.
That's right.
Difference, though, with film here is that each frame of film has a different array of image capture or of points of image capture. Yeah. So that here you see that the intensity is centered about, right here in the middle. In the next frame, it's moved slightly over to the right. You see that the peak is slightly to the right of center.
Right.
And that has to do with the fact that it's the exact same image, but there was no point of image capture, right, where there once was in the successive frame. It has to go to the closest point of image capture, and that is another silver halide crystal that's maybe just slightly different, slightly to the left or slightly to the right or up or down, whatever. The point is, it's never exactly the same. And so that's why you see that maybe there's something in the substrate that reflects the reality and actually helps to better understand the simulation hypothesis. So we concede maybe there is an algorithmic calculation, right? The simulation hypothesists, right, like Bostrom, would say that, okay, there's the calculation, right? There's the algorithm, and then there's the display, what we see. There's the code behind what it is that we see. And the code is run or executed, and then we experience the world as dictated by the code. What nilology wants to do is insert an extra step, right? Where there was nothing, or where we were completely oblivious to a filter. Now there is something, right? So that we have to maybe examine and might enrich the simulation hypothesis. And that is, there's an algorithm which runs, and that's, I guess, digital. It's captured, whatever is run is captured first, whatever captured means in this analogy, but the algorithm is run, it's captured on film and then displayed digitally. So the capturing onto the film, in a way, you see that this idea of the substrate, right, where the silver halide crystals in each frame are a different array. That could be an explanation for why quantum mechanics exists. Quantum mechanics could be a function of the fact that each frame of time, the points of image capture are distinct, different, so that each moment light will hit on an absolute frame. The frame is the absolute space of reality. Okay.
All right.
And at point 1, in the digital world, that one point, row 1, column 1, that pixel, that will always be an exact same absolute space. But in a film frame, the top leftmost frame, or the top leftmost crystal, is not going to be in the exact same position
every time, every moment.
And that could be the fuzziness that we need. That kind of fuzziness, as the film runs, that could be the cause or the explanation to the fuzziness that we see at the subatomic level, or when we're trying to actually measure what's happening at the grain. Okay. The teleological, way is to try to maybe find that filter in between. Remember that idea of if you put a horizontal polarizer and a vertical polarizer.
If
you shine light through horizontal and vertical polarizer, no light gets through in the other side.
No light gets through at all.
Remember that experiment, right? Wasn't it so cool when we placed a diagonally polarized filter in the middle of those two?
Oh yeah.
And we got light on the other side.
That's right.
You know, by adding something, right? We reveal the light. We reveal the light. By adding a filter, we reveal the light. Right? That seems counterintuitive, right? So here, to wrap it all up, sorry again.
That's
right?
okay.
There are two filters, right? Or there are two parts to the simulation hypothesis initially. There's the algorithm, then there is the display. The algorithm is digital, the display is digital. What we're saying is add something in between there. We're saying add the fact that the algorithm doesn't go directly to the display, but is captured somewhere. And that there's something that's non-digital in the capture. The non-digital adds remember that digital is like discrete, analog is continuous. What we want to do is allow for there to be something that can't be fully captured by ones and zeros. The wave-like nature, right? Or the waves are analog, right? And yes, you can make an analog signal a digital signal, right? But you're going to lose some information. What we want to do is to reintroduce something that's analog into the simulation hypothesis, because there might be something that we're missing, right? By just thinking that simulation is a digital universe, right? There's something analog to the simulation. Again, this is something that needs more fine tuning, but
that's very interesting. Very interesting.
There might be something
it's
there
it's a way of. I mean, we talked about nothing being essential and so forth to the world being real, and what you've just done there is a really interesting. Well, it was a complex chaotic this time, but
the chaotic gets really interesting. I just pointed out two things, right? But you have light is bent by mass, right? So you can think that that as light bends around heavy objects, you can think that objects in this universe are like lenses in the higher universe.
Yes.
And that the camera is the entire universe, right? So there are all these lenses inside of a camera bending light and focusing light in certain ways, right? Then you sort of say that there's aberration, right? That the aberration is when light doesn't quite you can't get light to quite focus because of the weight of the actual lens itself. It's a chaotic that I've had in mind for a long time.
You've got a lot of interesting wrinkles there.
Yeah, so the senses are like the film, right? The film or the CCD sensor, that's what we sort of experience, and those are our senses, right? So as light collects onto us, light collects onto film. That's the parallel there. And yeah, the photographer is like I guess the mind, and God is still God, but
God is always God.
And time, I guess, are successive film frames of film are time. Yeah. So
well, it's something. I mean, you like that. You were talking about before, Gustavo, how you liked all the in the architect scene from Matrix, you liked all the different screens
Yes.
because those are different registers in a certain sense of different ways of registering what's going on, and that needs to be chosen one of them. And the insertion of the film seems to be akin to that in a certain sense. Yeah.
The electron can take any number of paths, right? An infinite number of paths, but Neo will choose one path, and reality will be defined by those choices. So there's something wave-like in reality. Until we make a choice, things are wave-like, continuous, right? But when we make the choice, they become discrete. It's this, not that.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. The architect seems to have acknowledged that it was incorporating choice into the matrix was what brought it down all the time.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought that was a very interesting notion about, and choice is sort of like this collapsing of the wavelength, like you were talking about. Very interesting kind of parallels and all that.
I guess with that, we have one section left.
Okay.
So I guess with that, we'll.
Okay. See you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
Entering the Universe has been brought to you by the Society of Namecoin. Until next time. No.